Welcome to another conversation we have today as a part of the Policy Panchayat. My name is Yash. I lead PPI and I also work at Twitter in a policy role. And today we are joined by a very special guest, Arindam Banerjee. He runs and leads PDAG. It's a consultancy and actually does a lot more. And it's something we'll allow him to describe in his own words. And he's a former Chevening Scholar. He went to Oxford for an NPP. And there's just a lot that we have to cover today. So without any further ado, we'll quickly get started. We'll start with Arindam. Why don't you just give a brief introduction about yourself and the work that you do?
Yeah, thanks, Yash. I mean, it's a pleasure to be here with you. And also I guess, with the kind of audience that Public Policy India and you kind of, speak to and share updates on public policy and governance sector in the country. So, yeah, thanks for having me. Well, I mean, so I'm the co-founder and partner at PDAG, which is Policy and Development Advisory Group. We are a social enterprise based out of Delhi, headquartered in Delhi, and we work, what I would say, to kind of, across the domains of public policy and governance, mostly through the arms of strategic communications, research, and advisory.
Right.
So that's loosely what we are, and we are currently running on our 5th year. And it's been a crazy journey so far, and we kind of have a very young team with most of the people between 25 to 30.
Right.
And for my own self, I have been a former journalist turned rural development vis-a-vis governance practitioner, more into realms of public policy advisory, and now obviously as a policy entrepreneur, if I may say so. So, and that's also been a crazy journey of over around 12 to 13 years since my first master's at TISS, which is in Media and Cultural Studies. Yeah. So, and that loosely, that's the kind of trajectory.
Yeah. Maybe just building on that and holding on to the same thought, Randam. Why don't you tell us more about the early years of working, like, the switch from, say, journalism and you also were Prime Minister's Rural Development Fellow, if I'm not mistaken, right? Again, a very, very prestigious program. So maybe the switch from journalism to both of these in particular.
Yeah. So, I mean, when I was in my, a decade and 2 years back, around somewhere around, I guess, 2008, 9, I was completing my undergrads from Jadavpur University in Calcutta. For those who don't know, it's one of the most, I would say, a very prestigious and a rigorous place to be, especially whether you're in your undergrads or your postgrads, and one of those alternative thinking places which makes you think and question and critique a lot of things that you kind of get to de-learn as we move ahead in your life. So I think initially my idea was actually to join, one of the 3 services, probably the IFS or the IPS or the IAS, as a lot of people think so. But I was also into writing and I was also studying comparative literature, so which actually inculcated a lot of literary and I would say global practices and discourses across the world, and kind of made me kind of think through a lot of things. And it was also at the same time when a lot of contemporary socio-political developments happening in Bengal around the time of 2007-8. And by due luck or by company, kind of got associated with a few of them in terms of writing pieces and kind of advocating student campaigns, and they're quite vigorous in nature. So the kind of liking and I would say the kind of interest moved squarely towards kind of looking at writing and looking at journalism as a kind of taking of something as a career option. So once I was about closing my undergrads, I kind of had applied to a few places, and some of them being ACJ, IMC, and those of those places. And this by that time, obviously it's the best institute of social sciences education in the country, but there weren't anything like a journalism program, but it had started what was called the Media and Cultural Studies program under the School of Media and Cultural Studies, SMCS. And it was relatively new, and so I don't remember, but someone had asked me, why don't you kind of just apply there? And I had very little idea of what this has, or I was aware of the name, that's it. So, and that happened actually, a small group of 13, 14 students. And this actually gave the opportunity to kind of not only get introduced to, kind of the huge realm of social sciences as a discipline, but also like a huge, kind of window towards understanding what is called multiple perspectives on issues, and concepts. So whether it's, inequality, whether it's kind of the same idea of justice, or, the question of identity, and the question of, a lot of other things like barriers, and because you get to meet so many people from the entire country, and most of them with a sense of with a cause and a belief to do probably something, and then you also get to meet people not only from the department, from this discipline that you're studying. And I'm studying media and cultural studies, which again was not a journalism course per se.
Yeah.
So it was much critical pedagogy related thing with I would say a mix of practice oriented modules that were part of it. And one of my the journalism instructor and the teacher for the course was a very senior journalist, Samira Khan, and she is a very well known writer and a researcher on gender rights too.
Yeah.
So Samira had told that's one line that, whether you are a journalist or whether you're a writer or whether you, but you are here, and what the one line that she had mentioned to me, and I had picked up that line, was that, just keep your eyes and ears open, irrespective of wherever you work, and try and document stuff. So when I say document, it doesn't necessarily mean that one has to write a LinkedIn post or a Twitter post, because those were things that are not even there. I mean, I remember I had my Twitter account in 2009, but it was hardly known that time in India. But it's not more than that. It's actually about three things. It's keeping your eyes and ears open. It's keeping your, the sense of empathy alive on whatever you do. And three is to try and learn and de-learn a lot of things. And I think these three foundational principles actually made me kind of, go ahead and decide to take up what is called hardcore reporting. I mean, it is still there that time. And politics, conflict, and insurgency was something that always interested me, because of the kind of, I would say, the background, the kind of readings, the kind of people that I have met, and the kind of people I looked up to in terms of writing, whether it was, Ajit Sahi of that time, or even, the way Tehelka used to cover, 2009-10. So it was always a sense that, let's do something. And so I did my master's level internships with Indian Express and the CNN-IBN, that point of time, the CNN-IBN.
Yeah.
And then the Indian Express actually had asked me to, join immediately, but then I kind of waited for the masters to get over. And so then once it got over, it was just at the brink of when Bengal was undergoing that massive transformation of seeing the guard of change that happened in 2011. So I joined just at that brink, and it was a fantastic opportunity to be there out in the field. And, when you join Indian Express in the country as a political reporter and a political correspondent, I mean, it is a great learning experience, and definitely brings in a lot of, what I would say, rigor in kind of thinking, and never to give up kind of an attitude, because you're chasing ideas and you're chasing things that could probably change a lot of things tomorrow if the story comes out. And insurgency was something that was also, in terms of theoretically, was something that had always interested me and fascinated me. And obviously, someone who's born and brought up in Bengal, and someone who's been into literature and other stuff, and obviously being from Jadavpur, you are no stranger to the idea of, the Naxalite movement, the Maoist insurgency, and the Northeast conflicts, and there are so many others. I mean, this is not probably the right forum to do so. So somewhere when, I was in Indian Express, but somehow the ambience in Calcutta was not something I was probably kind of, finding a lot of resonance to. So when this advertisement of Prime Minister's Fellowship came up in 2011, I think September or October. So it was something that I was not aware of, to be very frank. So a friend of mine, old friend of mine, who was working that time, I think with TIS only, and TIS was the knowledge partner. So he kind of told me when there was only 2 days left for the application, they don't know, why don't you give this a shot? Because you had covered, and you had written term papers, and you also covered the Maoist conflict as a intern reporter with the Indian Express. So it might be something that's up your sleeve. So I like, chalo, let me try. I mean, there's no harm in trying. And so I had no idea what Manrega was at that point of time. So, I just put in my papers, and I still remember when the interview happened. So there are around like huge group of people who applied, because it was something that was unknown, which the then rural development minister, whose kind of brainchild this was, Mr. Jairam Ramesh, had told that even in the first ceremony of the inaugural ceremony, that this is a leap of faith into the dark, and no one would know what this entails and what this would have on the other side of the tunnel. I mean, we are all co-travelers in this journey. So I guess this was more, I mean, the jump was more like that. And I still remember in the interview panel, and they asked me that, what do you envision, doing, say you get selected as a fellow? I like, the only thing I could probably do, or looking at my skill sets, and I was just 1 year or 1.25 year into my professional life, is that I can document the stories of those who have not been heard.
Yeah,
that's the only thing you can do. I mean, you don't have much more idea beyond that, right? But somehow, I guess, being true and being honest to what you want to do and to the cause of and your intent obviously matters sometimes, and especially at this kind of unique opportunity. So there it was. We were 146 of us selected across the country for the first time ever, young professionals from diverse fields, and with no idea of what the next 3 years going to look like. Probably the next 2 years, sorry. It was initially for 2 years. And then I had given options of Malkangiri, Dantewara, and West Midnapur. And West Midnapur was that time the epicenter of the Maoist conflict. It was the district with the highest number of casualties in the entire country every year. And it was also the district where the CPIM, the Maoist Politburo squad member Kishanji was running, REN. So that was where, I was placed, and I moved. So I moved directly from Mumbai via Berlin, where I was there for a fellowship for a brief period of time of 2 months, and directly landed in West Midnapur. So, that's the trajectory. And then, the next 3 years is what I believe laid the foundation of what I am, where I am today. And I guess for a lot of us from the group of 140, and for most of us, I believe it's not about, what you achieved in terms of your career. It's not about where you are right now. It's also about, what you saw, what you heard, what you mapped, what you documented, and then what you could do with that's knowing and learning, and kind of, with the treasure trove of things that you have experienced. So I think that's where the narrative got kind of, I would say, situated. And if there are 3 things, I think you kind of also mentioned about, probably if there are 2-3 things that you had, and considering that this kind of locational, it's also spatially related, right? So these are areas where people are, and when I speak, I can take the liberty to probably speak for a lot of us, because looking back, it's been a decade now. So, when you look back at it, you'll think that these are spaces where, it has over 40-50% indigenous population as a score. And for most in the country, and it's not anyone's fault, because of the lack of awareness, because of the lack of mainstreaming of the ideas around how they live, what kind of issues that challenge them, what kind of pathways of lifestyle that they follow, and what is their reality? What is the reality? Is the reality about what policymakers, practitioners, NGOs, development organizations, they try to say, or is the reality of what they lead their lives, and if they're happy, if they're content, is that reality? So in a way, a lot of people still ask me. I also have been asked in interviews, what are the 3 things that you achieved? And I keep saying that, I don't think I've achieved anything. I think what the single point of achievement that has happened is, getting emboldened into 3 things, 3 attributes, I believe. 1, to empathize, 2, to learn and de-learn, and 3, keep your eyes and ears open, and to document. Because if you don't do that, if someone doesn't do that, then you're missing out moments of history, because you never get an opportunity to go back.
This is so interesting, Arindam, and some parts of it I relate with so much, because again, I have a journalism background and made this switch to policy. And in fact, a lot of people who are doing very well in the policy space, I talk to them, and it comes out that they also have a background in journalism, or they've worked as journalists at some point. Maybe something that we could delve into deeper later. But how did Chevening happen? How was Oxford? Tell us more about that, please.
So I was a Rhodes finalist in the year 2010, and that was entirely for a subject that has no relation to what I do or we do. I mean, it was more of, I would say, the previous life before public policy. So I remember, so there was a finalist, so the finals happened in the Taj, and, there was some, I don't remember, there's this one interviewer, who was coming down the lift after all, everything got over, because as you know, I mean, in Rhodes, it's only 7 or 8 people who get selected for the finals, and then, 4 or 5 kind of get the final thing. So obviously those who couldn't, I mean, I think there were some 4 or 5 of us who did not make it in the finals after the finals happened, and it's fine. I mean, you get dejected and you get a feel disappointed and all. So while I was coming down the stairs, there was this one lady, I don't recollect where she was from, but obviously she was from some fancy space. One thing that she told me was that, there's a lot of intent in what you wanted to convey. So maybe this is not the right time, but you should definitely attempt to be at, Oxford at one point of time, maybe for something else. But you do have the intent, and you do have the courage to take up things that, probably you are also not sure of. So that always stayed with me. And so, by the time it was the second year, while in Midnapur, while in the fellowship, as it happens, because you're in such high intense kind of a space, you are only the time kind of, moves like in seconds and hours, like you don't get time to look back. So, a lot of this time when I used to be all alone and, in the night, and then it kept coming to me that, okay, I mean, what after 3 years? Because this obviously in this country, the way systems are and the paradigms are, no one expects that you continue to do the same thing. And by default, I was also not expecting that I should be doing the same thing. I mean, you can remain in that space for say another 2 years, but then what after that? How do you translate some of this into something else? And that's when I realized that, okay, if there is a limitation, the limitation is that maybe I should have some more foregrounding into the realm of public policy at large, into the discipline at large, and into certain kind of, I'd say interdisciplinary aspects of that. And I mean, let's take a try again, because the kind of social family background that I came from, obviously, I was privileged enough to have been studied in an English medium school, to study in Jadavpur. But again, it's a state-funded kind of a thing where you are always on scholarships and in tests. So the idea of, achieving something by your own was a principle that always drove me. And I think a lot of us who come from small towns in life, and that one thing also drove us and me, that let's attempt to apply to some of these places. And obviously I do give it that as a community, while you grow up on these spaces, you also do get to meet people who have come up from some of these institutions. Maybe they're very stellar careers that they have had, mostly academic, but also practitioners. And I always had that belief that when you meet people, kind of try to know more about what they do, how have they reached there, and what is it that they did besides the kind of other factors that probably help them. So when I started to realize that the kind of experiences that I'm having right now while in the PMRDF, and this is 2014 as I'm speaking, it will probably hold me in good stead, say, if I apply to something like a practice-driven kind of a course. And that's when I got in touch with a few people around, and I'd like to definitely put in the name of Varat Pandey, who was then the ministerial, OSD to Jairam Ramesh. And he was a mentor, he's still a mentor to me. And we had a lot of discussions, and he kept telling me that, Arindam, why don't you apply? And he was also at that time planning to go to Harvard for the Kennedy School. And he had a Chevening before, like probably a decade before I went. So, it kind of always played that, and I was very sure that I can't go unless I have a scholarship. So there's even no point thinking about it. So the idea of the scholarship was always at the beginning. The program became secondary. So then when you apply, and then things fell into place over the period of time. And obviously not without getting any time to devote to preparation or anything like that, because it's not that you even had the liberty to give time. I mean, you were running helter-skelter. Sometimes the chief minister would come down. Other time meetings are happening. You do your field visits all the time. But somehow, things moved. And I think the major thing that played a lot of part is the self-belief that one should have. And the self-belief, I believe, comes a lot also from grounded experiences, especially in the domain that you are. So because that, if you follow those three principles, what you're going to speak, what you're going to write, what you're going to portray would come from deep inside your heart. Because it's not something that you have to make up. It's not something that you have to think twice to speak. And it's not something that, you can undo once you've spoken. Because what you'll speak will just directly come in from your, heart, from the passion, that from the kind of engagement that you've had. And I think that is the single most reason which I believe also helped in the Chevening interview. And I was very sure once I kind of gave the interview that if nothing goes wrong, then I should be making it. So yeah, I mean, things fell into place by July 2015, and then it was September 2015. So yeah, I mean, I had a week before I kind of completed my tenure. By that time, they had increased the tenure by another half a year. But
Okay.
then, sadly, or because I was also going, so I did put in the papers of completion, and then within a week, so I just took some break, and within a week I was in Oxford. So obviously, this kind of drastic jumps to kind of give you a hit. You take time to settle in, and a lot of times I think as I moved to that following year in Oxford, and it took some time for me to settle in and also kind of understand the magnanimity of the place. And definitely, I mean, with the batch of, and it was the first time that the program was expanding to 120 students, and 126 students from 57 countries. So
Right.
the ongoing joke that point of time was that by the time we would learn about the number of countries, it would take at least 3 months for us to know. So, and by the time the first semester is over, which is the first trimester, and
Yeah.
then the gloomy days of UK, and with the rains and the sun no more there after 1:30 p.m. in the afternoon. So it's also a struggle, and it's also a way where one learns a lot: adaptability, resilience. And then things happen, maybe say back in the family, that you're on a scholarship, you don't have the liberty to probably again fly and
Yeah.
again come back. You
Yeah.
have to keep that in mind. So yeah, I mean, I think just to kind of weave the entire thing into a macro picture, it's actually a lot about resilience and a lot about how you evolve and adapt. And with the belief being in place that if there is a cause that you have in your inside the mind, inside the heart, then one has to have the belief to kind of stand for it and go for it. And I think that is true for anything, whether one is an entrepreneur, whether one wants to reach greater heights, one wants to write something, one wants to do something at large. That belief is something that one should hold very dearly. Yeah.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. And like from Berlin to West Midnapur in Bengal, and then from there to Oxford within a week, being quite a ride. But now, coming to what I'm assuming, and I personally also would love to know the most about, right, which is PDAG, and where did this idea come from, right, and how did you get started with this? Tell us more. We'd love to know.
Yeah. So the idea was there when, with a group of friends and fellow travelers and colleagues, I would say, while we were in the PMRDF journey, and, during one of the retreats, and that was, I guess, somewhere in Bhopal. Yeah, in Bhopal. And we were sitting in the, stairs, probably, enjoying, just taking some time off. And that's when two, three of our PMRDF colleagues from other states, a couple of us, and one of my, current co-founders, we were there, and then we were just talking about the huge level of disconnect that's there between what happens on the ground, like what gets executed on the ground, and what gets designed at I would say macro level 1, which is at the state, and macro level 2, which is obviously at the central level. And that's how, because you're seeing it, what is called the bottom up principle, and that's how the entire idea of decentralization is. But then with these ideas that you could see in practice, and there's so much of critical reflections within those 2 or 1.5 years, I think, when the time when we are in the retreat, we started questioning the idea of what does policymaking mean there, and what would mean good governance. How does that translate into something that is empathetic, something that some aspects that is people related. So when you say public policy, what does it entail? There is one part of the word is public, the other part of the word is policy. Now, if the public is removed from the realm of policy making, then is public policy then true public policy? I believe no. So if you look at it, a lot of the policy making in the last 12, 13, 15, 16 years, a majority of them, by the way, have come from public movements, social movements, whether it's Right to Work, Manrega. Now, the policy making part of it probably couldn't translate the entire spirit of it. And probably it was not even translatable, like something that could not have been translated, because a lot of things do not work in the programmatic mode or in the, the real, I would say, the pragmatic mode. But then the spirit remains, right? So how can state as an idea, state as a concept, because we are a welfare state by definition in the Constitution. So how can the idea of welfare and the idea of people-centric policy making be enshrined in the design process? That's what we wanted to understand more. And I believe that's the central idea behind how PDAG came up. that can we not look at envisioning an entity, a body, I would not even name it, whether it's a consulting firm, it's an agency, it's an organization, it's what, cannot be an entity which can try redefining some of these questions by starting to work somewhere and then kind of learn from it, because it's a process of learning, as I said, and de-learning also. And slowly those ideas gathered steam, and we all kind of moved to different avenues while PMRDF completed, and we also moved to multiple other career options. A few of us, some stayed back with the idea, some kind of moved ahead. So but three of us kind of always wanted to take it forward at some level. So even while I was in JPAL, working as a policy manager, I was there in Boston, I was there in Ranchi, I was there in Delhi, moved to Delhi after a while. Those questions kept coming back to me. And again, that gave me a very different and a very useful and a brilliant perspective. Yeah. So that's where I think we realized that, okay, let's start, because you have to start somewhere. And if it means, starting with no means, starting very slow, starting absolutely without going ballistic about what you are, that's also fine. So that's how I think the beginning happened in 2018, where it started off by just kind of providing certain I would say just policy research, and I would say basic analysis of policy making, socio-political issues, communication matters, how do you communicate, what should come in when we say people-centric public policy making. So if there are assembly debates, should it not be informed with what people are thinking on the ground about, how those kind of issues have affected them? Because then how can elected representatives better speak to the bureaucracy as policymakers? Because when we say policymakers, the term very loosely, in India, it is not unified in nature. One has to keep in mind that in a democracy like ours, there are two sides to that one coin of policymaker. And one side you have the executive, and the other side you have the elected representative. So, and both need to speak to each other, right? And need to kind of assimilate each other's ideas, because at the end of the day, no one is complete without the other. So can we play that role of the bridge, where you kind of bridge some of these thoughts, and obviously thoughts which are grounded in evidence, 1, 2, rigor, 3, with a lot of empathy, on an empathetic ear, I must say. So that's where I believe is where PDAG started its journey.
Amazing. I mean, there's so many threads to pick there, but mindful of time, could you tell us maybe 3 or 4 things? I mean, I'm sure there will be a lot more things that surprised you while working as a consultant to state governments. I know that you work very closely with the Jharkhand state government, right, across focus areas and ministries, and some others as well. But some of the things that were surprised to you have been surprising for you over the years as you have worked with these governments, and maybe weren't so obvious when you were starting off.
A lot of times, program implementation and monitoring across governments are all about Excel sheets, and and it's a fun thing to admit, and also utilization certificates and off-late dashboards. So how do you translate things beyond that? There has to be a way to translate beyond that, right? I mean, people's lives and the way it is impacted cannot be captured only in numbers. The numbers are only a part and way to capture it. And also, if we want to better those numbers, then there has to be ways that need to be integrated at multiple levels. 2, the common belief that is there that Sarkari Naukri is the most easiest thing to do for those who look forward to that, and that's a refrain, right? I mean, and they're mostly inefficient. That's why the private sector is so required. And definitely, I mean, so I think that those are semi-myths. At least in the last, whatever I have seen in the last 12-13 years across, from the district to the state, even to a particular level, 1 or 2 central government institutions also, and in other kind of areas, in UTs also, government, public servants or government servants work a lot. And work a lot, when I say work a lot, maybe some of it are also work which might not be useful work, but then that's the mechanism. That's what, when people say system as a kar raha hai, what's the system? System is all about the people. So if they would not have worked, a lot of things would have gone out of the track. And there are crises, there are moments, there are situations where people hardly are aware of how things fall into place. So I think that's a fascinating learning for me, for us. And what that has taught vis-a-vis is that, you need a lot of patience and perseverance to work with governments while not being a government official yourself, or, a public servant yourself. So that, I think, is very key to make things work. And two, I believe, is the inefficiency factor. It's not inefficiency. I believe what is necessary is, again, comes from that. One has to have the patience and perseverance to build, what can be called the ideology for people to get motivated into an idea. And that can again happen where people invest a lot of time and energy into, say, maybe one region, one space with people, and drill those ideas down. It's very easy to say, welfare policies or welfare centric policy making. It is not so easy to translate that, because the norms, the procedures, so much of paperwork, all of that will hinder the rate of, the idea turning into reality. But if the belief is there, it does get translated. And we have seen so many of such ideas across the country, which actually have gotten translated.
Yeah. No, couldn't agree more. If very, maybe just the top 3 or 4 things that come to your mind in terms of skills. Say, for example, someone like me, right? Say someone who's 23, 24, just, still getting started in the policy as a career, wants to join a firm like PDAG, right? And I know that there are peers that you have, right, who do similar work, if not the same. What are the top skills you would say are that you, as someone who's hiring, would look for?
I think, first of all, one needs to have a very strong analytical sense.
Okay.
And when I say analytical sense, it has to be razor sharp.
Okay.
I mean, if one needs to work with very high level officials at the highest level of bureaucracy, with highest level of elected representatives, one is to have a very strong analytical sense, because no one is here to listen to could-be's and maybes and would-be's.
Okay.
You need to have a very definitive sense of what you're saying. So it doesn't again mean that you only need to know what's an Excel sheet saying. It also has to be how you grasp a larger scenario and what could be its contextualization in a micro level scenario. Two, one needs to be very confident about himself or herself, and that confidence can come in from a lot of rigor and a lot of learning. And when I say learning, it means not learning on the job. It means to also read enormously. And by reading, again, a mix of a lot of things, because if one wants to say that, want to work in public policy and governance, one cannot say that, I don't have time after my work, so I need some time off. And you can't do that. Because one needs to get updated. I will not name, but I have had the pleasure, and I still have the pleasure of working at the highest level of bureaucracy in one state, who is probably in his position, the highest office in the state. And that senior most official still manages to read 2 books every week. And we exchange notes about, some of the thematic areas, maybe if it's a fiction, and, what kind of other works have been written in that area. So that is where I still draw inspiration that if he can read at his level, where he should be, 24/7, he is on the hooks. Then, I should make attempts to read 4 books probably. And again, it's not a prescription, but it's a way that one can look at. 3, one needs to be very, very, clear about why you are in this realm. Why question to be very clear. Do you want to work in programs? If you want to work in programs, then what is it that you want to work on? And what is it that you don't want to work on? Because the problem that we have across the country is also that most of us tend to become, what is called generalists. And that's the reason why there's also a lack of experts. If you take around any discipline, you look up, ranging from mid-career to senior most, you'll have not more than 30 to 35 known names across the country. In any discipline per se. Why is it in a country of 135 CR? We can't have more than like 35. I'm not saying that, probably there's some corner people are working and brilliant stuff is happening. But then again, it's a fallacy that we don't know about. So that clarity of thought, and that comes probably with practice, while being there in each of the fields, should be there, that what is it that I want to do with the perceived position that I want to take up. So I believe these are the 3 things. So one, being very much, as I told, very clear sense of analytics, like analytical sense of mind, to very clear about the intent that what you want to do. Three, a lot of learning to be taken up, and learning, I mean, reading, writing, and obviously speaking. One needs to know how to put things succinctly, say in 2 minutes of time. Without, because, highest level meetings, if you look at top-notch minister's schedule, a visiting delegate actually comes and meets for what? 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Whatever happens in those 10 minutes.
Yeah.
People don't meet for 1 hour.
No, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. In fact, like, so, I personally spend so much of my time daily just reading, right? And have been trying to juggle between, say, the difference between information and knowledge, right? So information is like, say, newspaper, you'll get, it won't be relevant maybe tomorrow. Knowledge is books, podcasts, whatever, might be relevant in a long time to come. And just you have to strike that balance. And I would say you're literally working when you're reading if you work in public policy. It's like, it's a occupation of this thing. Okay, quickly, as we wrap this up, and this has been such an phenomenal interaction. What's next for PDAG? If there's one thing that you could share with us that, and when I say PDAG, I mean anything that's been on your mind that you're like, okay, I want to work on this or build on this or something like that.
Yeah. So one central idea that we are trying to work on is our work on migration, which some of you might be aware, the Safe and Responsible Migration Initiative. It's one of its first ever kind of evidence to policy action initiative in the country, and especially in the context of the post-pandemic world and what we all saw on the newspapers and everything. Yeah. So what we are looking ahead is trying to understand, whether a strong data-based, data-backed kind of a systemic framework would be created. Maybe, right now we are working with one state as a source state and 2 states as destination states. Okay. And, probably see how the pilot goes ahead in the next 1 year, till next year, August and September. Because if that can be successfully then scaled up or integrated into the policy framework of, say, even one state, it establishes a very strong case point for other states and even for the Ministry of Labor and NITI and others to kind of take it up. And for that matter, NITI is kind of, backing this initiative as I speak, and they're eager to know how it kind of translates, because then it gives a sense of dignity, safety, and responsibility towards workers who I believe very strongly are the ones that have made the nation that we are today. Yeah. And if we cannot care or even be a little bit of have that empathy towards the huge 92% of the entire workforce, which is informal in nature, which is unnamed and unmapped in nature, then what good are we for, by claiming that we are in public policy and we want to better systems and we want to build resilient systems. So we are banking on that, and we are banking on the spirit and the idea, and we are joined by brilliant collaborators across the board, from ISB to CMID to a lot of other researchers and academics, kind of contributing in their own way through time, through kind of inputs. And really hope that if this kind of falls into the line, and then we can demonstrate something strong, then it can probably be replicated in a very good, efficient manner. And at least that will be a little bit contribution into the world of governance and public policy as an entity and as an institution.
Absolutely. That's very wonderful. And thank you so much for sharing, Arindam. I cannot thank you enough for taking out the time today. It means a lot, because I know just how beneficial it will be for anyone that's tuning in. For audiences, we'll link Arindam's LinkedIn profile in the show notes. Feel free to, please feel free to look him up there and reach out. He's very helpful. I'm sure he'll be happy to help in whatever way is possible. And let us know in comments, how do you like this? If there's someone else we should get to, have a chat, what topics we should consider cover. And thank you for joining us today. And thank you again, Arindam. We'll speak soon.
Thank you, Yash. Thank you. And I hope, the young members in the public policy fraternity and also our peers and all would all kind of, work together with some cause and some intent in their minds and hearts. And, we can only try as much as we can. And the rest is not on us, right? As I say.
Absolutely.